Hello everyone, thank you for joining us. We're going to begin very shortly. We're going to open a session in 1 minute. We're waiting for more people joining us.
به جمهوری اسلامی نه، به جمهوری اسلامی نه، به جمهوری اسلامی نه، به جمهوری اسلامی نه. ما صدای آزادی با هم برای آبادی ایران می جنگیم، کنار هم می خوانیم. نابود باد استبداد، نابود باد استبداد، نه به جمهوری اسلامی، نه به جمهوری.
Raha Ajudani, political and human rights activist. At March 28, 2021, 102 of us political and civil rights activists inside Iran issued an open letter to the Secretary General and the UN Security Council, calling for sanctions against the Islamic Republic, the boycott of its officials, Ali Khamenei's resignation, and the complete dissolution of the Constitution of the Islamic Republic in Iran, to pave way for a non-violent transition to a democratic and secular government. We, the signatories of this letter, have presented the UN Security Council the request of Iranian citizens, which they have long awaited for, and we have reported that the existence of democracy and human rights are impossible within the regime of the Islamic Republic. The Islamic Republic, religious tyranny, and religious dictatorship are not the choices of any of us Iranians. In December 2017 and November 2019, thousands of Iranians all over the country took to the streets and shouted "No to the Islamic Republic" before being killed on the streets of Iran in cold blood. Puya Bakhtiari shared a voice message with millions of Iranians before getting shot to death by the terrorist forces of the Islamic regime, in which he addressed us Iranians with exemplary courage. People of Iran, come and bring this criminal sect down once and for all. And now his father, Manucher Bakhtiari, has been beaten very violently, thrown in the trunk of a car, and has been arrested once again. The justice-seeking mothers of the victims are also under constant pressure from this hostage-taker regime. And the lives of the likes of Mohammad Nourizadeh and our Iran has been under captivity of this criminal sect for 42 years. For these clear reasons, we have issued consecutive letters to the West, Western governments, forums, and international institutions requesting aid and support for the calling of the Iranian people to transition from the Islamic Republic to a democratic and secular government. Europe and the current US government should not recognize a criminal, warmongering, armed-to-the-teeth terrorist regime as a normal government, and have diplomatic, commercial, and economic relations and agreements with. The international community should not be deceived by continuous lies of lobbyists and whitewashing agents of the Islamic Republic, such as Javad Zarif, Trita Parsi, Nayak, Mustafa Taitzadeh, and other so-called reformists. The Islamic Republic is an established ISIS, which has been holding Iran and its people hostage for 42 years. Therefore, the international community must not recognize the rule of ISIS in Iran and must stop legitimizing it by writing agreements with this established Islamic terrorism. This regime does not belong to international summits nor conferences, but to the ash heap of history and is official to international courts. We call upon Western governments, especially Europe and the United States, to exert maximum pressure and comprehensive sanctions against the Islamic Republic in Iran. Our vote is a vote to overthrow the Islamic Republic in Iran.
All right, hello and welcome everyone. We are glad to have you here with us tonight. The aim of this space series is raising awareness on the Islamic regime's propaganda and issues surrounding it. This is our second session with the title of Boycotting the General Elections in Iran. The duration of this space is going to be 90 minutes. The first 60 minutes, we're going to have a talk with our guests and discuss the topic with them. And in the final 30 minutes, we're going to have a Q&A session, which we will have the audience to come up and become the speaker and ask their questions from our guests. which we will get into more detail about it later on. So yeah, in case any of you are facing any technical difficulties, for example, not having the audio or other issues of such, please try to close your app and reopen it and try to rejoin us. And hopefully the problem will be solved by then. And in case a problem happens with me as the host, I will try to immediately create a new session, and we will be sharing the link of this new space on our accounts, and you can follow it up and join us there again. All right. Tonight with me, we have two moderators, Sarah and Mamadou. And now I would like to pass the mic to Sarah. Thank you very much.
Hello, everyone. Happy to have you here. My name is Sarah, an Iranian citizen. I was born and raised under the gender apartheid dictatorship of the regime in Iran. I am nothing but a freedom seeker. I strongly say no to Islamic Republic in Iran, and I am not going to give up until I earn democracy and secularism for Iran. I jeopardize my life to be the voice of ordinary Iranian people who have been oppressed inside Iran and censored outside of Iran. I put my life in danger because I might be identified through my voice and even receive death threats by the murderous regime in Iran. But I will not stop till then. I would like to pass the microphone to Mamadou to introduce himself. Please, Mamadou.
Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to have you all here. My name is Mamadou Babai. Professionally, I am a game developer who got involved in Iran's politics by chance. I participated in December 2017, January 2018 protests against the regime and got arrested, imprisoned, and received 30 lashes and 8 months of prison for speaking out against the regime's evil ideologies and domestic and foreign policies. Currently, I live in exile in the Netherlands, and after leaving Iran, I am still actively opposing the regime by any means I could. As such, developing and dedicating an anti-propaganda tool, formerly called Baranda's Storm, which is now called Mamadou Archives. And that's why I am here today, in order to expose the regime's propaganda.
In this event, we are going to send this message to the world. We are going to boycott the so-called presidential election in June because the regime in Iran does not represent us and has no legitimacy. But the regime uses propaganda and disinformation to convince the democratic countries that the election in Iran is democratic, not rigged, and that it is supported by Iranians. Before I pass the microphone to our guests, I would like to bring your attention to a survey, a very important survey, result on the parliamentary election in 2020, in order to show you how much the regime in Iran is losing internal legitimacy year by year. This survey has been launched by Gaman, a non-profit research foundation. This survey was conducted between January 30th and February 5th in 2020 with more than 43,000 responders, 90% of which are residing in Iran. The findings reflect the opinions of literate people over the age of 19 in Iran. The results can be generalized to this population with a 95% confidence level and an error margin of 5%. According to this survey, in February 2020, 81% of the target population announced that they would not vote in the upcoming parliamentary elections last year. I have to mention that this figure was 67% in Gaman's survey of March 2019. According to the survey results, in a free referendum, 76% would say no to the Islamic Republic. 15% would say yes to the Islamic Republic, and 9% say they have no definite answer and will decide depending on circumstances. I highly encourage everyone to check gammon.org website to learn more about these surveys in both English and Persian. In addition to this Gammon survey, Phoenix Project of Iran launched a survey on a presidential election in 2021 this year, just a few days ago, that we are waiting for the results.
So I would like to welcome Mr. Martin. Thank you for accepting our invitation. And I would like to pass you the microphone. And I would like to ask you first introduce yourself to our audience in case some of them are not familiar with what you are doing. And after that, we could start the discussion. Thank you.
I have sent you the invitation to become the speaker, Mr. Walton.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming and thank you for inviting me. My name's Walt Martin. It's my real name. I'm not Iranian. I'm American. And I got involved with Iran heavily in 2009 during the election. For the so-called Green Movement, the reformers, which I think by now everyone knows there are no reformers in Iran. The subject of boycotting the election, I don't know how far that would go in Iran and if anyone would get in trouble for voting against people who are not on the ballot or not voting at all. The only possible way I see to remove the regime is by force. And the only people that can do that are the people in Iran. And believe me, there are many from different areas of Iran and different ethnic backgrounds that would like to do that. So there's really not much to say on the issue. Everyone here knows that elections in Iran are a farce, and that Khomeini or IRGC commanders pick who is going to lead and represent them, including Foreign Minister Zarif. I really don't believe he has any power, and I don't say that lightly. I have some inside information regarding the hostages, and he's been unable to produce any results. So I would like to hear your opinion. As an American, I don't have much say in your election. Ashamed of my own election in this country this past year. There was a lot of shenanigans going on. But I'd like to hear about your boycott and your strategies and any other strategies that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Martin, for your comments. As an Iranian, I must say many Iranians have been saying no during the past 4 decades to the Islamic Republic by not participating in the election because that was the only choice they had, including me, myself. It was my way of not caring, but saying no to the Islamic Republic. Many people, this election specifically, see it not voting as a referendum to say no to the Islamic Republic. It's not about one candidate or the other candidate. It's about saying no to the Islamic Republic. That's why we all use the hashtag. We created the campaign, all the dissidents, no to IR, or in Persian, na be Jumhuri Islami. I guess everyone in Iran knows, almost everyone knows the Islamic regime does not have any legitimacy and popularity among the people. But unfortunately, regime still has some propaganda tools that are working effectively in order to create a false narrative and tell the world otherwise. That's it. Yeah.
I would like to invite anyone right now, if you have any comment on boycotting the election, because we are few right now in the room and we are waiting for more guests to join us. So if you have any comment, you can raise your hand and join us.
Ardashi, are there anyone in the audience who wants to make any comment? Maybe they are raising their hands.
I have made Mehdi and Shabnam speakers, so please feel free to share us your thoughts on the matter. Thank you.
Can I speak now?
Yes, unfortunately, I'm hearing some noise in the background. Shabnam, go ahead.
Now it's okay? You heard my voice?
Yes, it's okay. Thank you.
I'm here to talk about the election, what the election it's like to us, to our Iranian people. It's not an election. It's not fair. I think all of us here, it's against the regime, IR regime, Islamic Republic of Iran. We are against the Islamic Republic of Iran, because we have a mass violation of human rights in Iran, and all of us know that, and know that election is not what we want for Iran, for Iranian people. Because of that, because we don't have any voice in Iran, our voice. People that try to be our voice now are in the prison. They tortured them. They executed them. And that's because of that. Because of that, we boycott the regime of Iran, because it must be stopped somewhere. The executed, the torture, everything must be stopped somewhere. And with boycotting the election, we want to show the people in the world we don't agree with this regime. We don't want this regime anymore. We want to change this regime to the better government, and people in Iran want to choose their government. They want the democracy, they want the secularism, they want that. They want to live in a normal way. This is what that I came here to say about Iranian people. Where we I want to say we have a mass violation of human rights in Iran now. With COVID-19, they didn't vaccination the people. They doesn't allow the people to vaccinate in a proper way. Because of that, we are angry. We are tired of seeing people are dying in Iran. People are tortured in Iran. Because of that. Thank you for letting me speak here. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Shabnam, for comments, for reflecting the Iranian people's voice. I see Mehdi is now a speaker. Do you have any comments, Mehdi Jan?
Hi, everyone. Before we just start, I just want to say a big thank you to you, actually, and Sarah and Ardashir for this freedom of speech platform where everyone can get together and speak their voice. And also thank you, dear Adel, for taking the time for editing and covering all corresponding video that has been available to you all your guys in YouTube, I think. And I will be talking about the boycott election. I think the reason why I wouldn't be participating due to social economic that way, the country is ruled by the one person. To be honest, that guy that has no sense of reality. For social structure, I think there is no point of voting when there is no hope for the future. No jobs, lack of pay, no opportunity for young people as well. There is no woman right, which means there is no equality. So it's one way I'm happy where Iranian in Iran have now come to realize where this regime is not longer suited for us, to be honest. Simple. And a few a few questions I will be asking later on, guys. And I will mind handing it over to my wife for her to speak. If that okay, if you don't mind, guys.
Yeah, thank you. Go ahead.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sonia. I'm born and raised here in the UK, London, and I've been Iran a couple of times in my life. In these few times that I've been, I've seen and felt the Iranian way of living, unfortunate circumstances. Also, just a quick thing, just wanted to say a big thank you for giving me this opportunity to voice my opinion on propaganda to you all. I'm sorry, I do apologize. What is propaganda to me? Propaganda is an import interpreter of a country or a civilization or even a land where they provide false information and guidance to the people of the country or outside world for the benefit of their own needs and desire. For example, this could involve human rights, diversity, even equality, religious beliefs, or even corruption within their society to control or manipulate the Iranian minds. We as Iranians are here to get together in order to help one another to become a unity so we can make a difference in our homeland. As we are all now in the 21st century and a lot of people have access to the internet, giving people all these opportunities to use this space to be able to gain freedom of speech. Now, what's freedom? Freedom for the Iranian people is to live lives without living in fear of being themselves. Freedom is to be able to stand up for their rights without needing to feel scared or guilty for their voice getting heard. So let's help the Iranian people to stand up together to get this resolved for the benefit of the millions of innocent Iranian people and try to get this regime to change by putting on pressure on the government to listen to the problems of the people living in Iran. Even though I know it may be hard because of the strict laws over there, but we shall pursue this till we get what we want, and that is not the regime and wanting the regime out. Now I hope for the best for the Iranian people. Thank you all. God bless you and God bless the Iranian people. Amen.
Thank you very much, Sona, for your beautiful words, and thank you, Mehdi. I also see Miss Farzana Aghai. She's part of Shahja from inside Iran. If you would like, I would like to invite you on a stage so you could be one of our speakers. But before I must remind you, this space is also at the moment being broadcasted to other platforms such as Instagram, YouTube, and Clubhouse. So it's not limited to Twitter. Everyone else is right to hear us. I just wanted to say our guests and thank you very much.
Thank you, Mamadou. I want to take an opportunity here before more people are joining us and our guests are coming and share a critical matter with you. Many of us know about the 14% declaration that will come out in June 2019. I'm sure most of you have heard about it. Many of the signatories of the declaration are either in prison as we speak or released on bail, but under heavy surveillance. Mr. Mohammad Nourizad is one of them and is currently imprisoned in Evin prison. He is on hunger strike and he is in a critical situation. He had been administered 8 times in a row in one day with unknown medicines. However, human rights organizations barely talk about him. Mr. Abbas Wahedian Shahrudi is another signatory of the aforementioned declaration, and he is currently out of prison and under surveillance. He stated that he will keep crossing the red lines of the regime and continue opposing the regime with no fear. He has to live under radar to not get arrested by the regime. But the Secret Service of the regime will find him sooner or later. This is not this time. No one knows what is gonna happen to him. Therefore, we call on the political leaders of the democratic countries, UN, and human rights activists to talk about these prisoners of conscience out loud to protect them.
Thank you, Sarah, for your statement. I also miss Shola Pakravan, but I cannot see her anymore. She was one of the mothers who lost her daughter to the Islamic Republic's cruelty. I hope she comes back. Maybe she went out due to technical difficulties of space. I am going to speak a state's propaganda tool. I could think of 6 of them that regime exploits in order to distort the reality, in order to create a false narrative of what inside Iran and the people's choice. So I will go through one of them one by one. Then I would ask our guests make their comments about them. One of the tools they exploit is censorship. They just control the news, which news gets out from the country by controlling the journalists, by controlling all the newspaper. Most of the independent journalists, they are in jail or they are forced to leave the country, or before a month or 2, usually before the elections, they arrest most of the dissidents whom they know speak out against voting or against the government. That's one of their tools that they exploit. The other one is exploiting visuals. For example, by manipulating photos or videos, they crowds of people who are, in line to vote. This is not true. Especially we saw this during the parliament election in 2020, which also this time was they blamed the low election turnout because of the coronavirus. It was their propaganda, which actually it was the lowest since the very establishment of the Islamic regime in 1979. And I believe they will do it again. The other one is actually this is one of the best known propaganda tool of the regime. They have been exploiting since the introduction of reforms in 1997. They open up the space just a few weeks before the election and tolerate the so-called bad hijab, of course, according to the regime's standard, in order to increase the participation in election by allowing people to taste of what could possibly happen if they choose the non-existent right candidate. Why I say non-existent right candidate? Because they filter out most candidates months before through what they call the Assembly of Experts or Majlis Khobregan. And, even Ahmadinejad, one of the clerics candidate, has exploited, it was not just a reformist, has exploited this method in his campaign before his first term. In addition to that, they artificially decrease the prices. For example, recently, the exchange rate of dollar and real, it was decreased dramatically, or the price of basic necessities of living. For this, I made about the hijab, because they want to, make people, taste what could possibly happen, which of course will never happen. All of us know that. And also some candidates like Ahmadinejad, he did it on his second term. They bribe part of the population by distributing foods or living necessities in poor areas inside the cities and far-off villages in weeks prior to the election, in order for those people to vote for them. These were 6 of those propaganda tools that the regime exploits that I could think of course, done that. But I would like to invite Mr. Walton Martin to make his comment about the propaganda tools the Islamic regime in Iran exploits.
I think one of the largest exploitation of the media would be mostly controlled by the U.S., which is Radio Florida and Voice of America. The other is BBC and the left-leaning newspapers and news outlets in the United States. President Obama had a lot to do with that, and the Democratic Party, which is why NIAC Council had their views listened to across America and Europe. There is no way to defeat that unless you are funded. And we can sit here and talk about it all day long, but without funding, which NIAC has millions and the newspaper outlets have millions, we can talk about it until the next Iran election, and we're not going to get anything done. I think the biggest thing that could be done against it, which we have started and we initiated 11 years ago, is to regain control of Voice of America and Radio Florida. I know some Iranians joke about it. I don't know the status in Iran, but we call it Voice of the Mullahs in English. That would be number one. The Iranian people, I know it's hard for them to speak out from Iran, but if they have made up accounts or fake accounts, they need to complain to U.S. State Department and to U.S. Congress about Voice of America and the messages that they're putting out. Secondly, I know Iranians in Iran can't do much about NIAC other than voice their concerns. I will reassure you that we're doing everything in our power to get these regime lobbyists shut down in the United States. And currently, I know of 2 or 3 active investigations into their backgrounds. U.S. authorities have this information. Believe me, it's been given to them time and time again. The obstruction to shutting them down is occurring at the White House level. So you might need to voice your complaints also to the White House. How much to listen is another story. The U.S. government needs to listen to the Iranian people. We have 50 million Iranians on our side, and you have 1 million Iranian regime people. I think you would like to side with the majority, not the minority. And we will continue to do whatever we can to shut these lobbies down and get your voice heard in the United States and the UK. The UK's got their own propaganda going on in their mainstream newspapers and news outlets. I do review them from time to time. I don't spend a lot of time on them because for those of you who are new that weren't here last week, I'm an Iranian refugee advocate, and I actually lost track of how many, but well over 2,700 Iranian refugees have been serviced by my organization. I've slowed down as of late, but from 2009 to probably 2018 was the majority of the cases. Mamadou, I heard you say earlier that you've been lashed. One of the parents is here of a victim in Iran. And I'll just say I pray for their souls, but I do understand the importance of getting this message out. I would estimate that at least 30% of the refugees that I've been in contact with have either been arrested, imprisoned, or tortured, and some of them beyond comprehension. I also had probably more than 50 Iranians released from prisons in Iraq and brought to safety in the European Union, England, Sweden, the US, and Canada. Any of these people, if they were returned to Iran, faced execution at both exposing the lobby and getting the information that we need to get from inside Iran. Exiled Iranians have different opinions out here and different groups. I'm well versed on MEK. I'm well versed on Pahlavi's organization. And there are some smaller ones, Awazi, Kurdish, all want the same thing. I'm not too sure about MEK or NCRI as they call it now. I think a lot of the people that joined are good people. I don't trust their leadership. They were involved in the revolution in 1979, and that speaks for itself. So I think there's some power-hungry people in that organization. Again, Not being Iranian, it's not my say to how you run your country. I would hope that the regime falls, and I would hope that it falls as quickly as possible. But I think the only way to do it is going to be by force, not at the ballot box, because your ballot box is broken in Iran. Listen for your comments.
Thank you, Mr. Martin. Thank you that you really, it seems like you stood with us and you stand with us, actually. And thank you again that raising attention and our voice, basically. I would like to take opportunity here and welcome Mr. Ahmed here among us. Mr. Ahmed, I would like to briefly tell you what you're talking actually in this session, and we would like to hear from you, your point of view, your comments. In this session, we have a message. We have a message from Iran, from people inside to the world. The message is that we are going to boycott the so-called presidential election in June because the regime in Iran does not represent us and has no legitimacy. But the regime uses propaganda and disinformation to convince the democratic countries that the election in Iran is democratic, not rigged, and that is supported by Iranians, which is not true. I would like to hear from you, Mr. Ahmed, please.
Thank you, Sarah. It's been a pleasure hearing your perspectives. I have not much knowledge about Iran. I have a very limited amount of knowledge about Iran, but it's been really refreshing hearing the secular voices of Iran. A little bit about myself before I say what I think about Iran is I am a secular ex-Muslim Yemeni refugee in Sweden, and it kind of breaks my heart to say that I live in Sweden because I see Sweden as one of these countries that are one of the main secular democratic Western countries that have been really supporting Islamization of Europe, but also supporting the dictators and the thirsty Saudi and the Iranian Islamist dictatorships that are really ruining the world as we know it. I'm not sure if you know about the Cairo Declaration, the Cairo Declaration was kind of like the United Nations, because you have the United Nations Human Rights Declaration that happened after the Second World War, and that kind of like composed all countries in the world to come together and say these are the human rights that we adhere to, equality of the sexes, equality of all human beings, human rights for children, human rights for minorities. So that they really laid the groundworks for the main human rights for all human beings pretty much. And this was grounded from postmodern Christian Reformation, right? So we know that the Christian belief and the Christian faith has really gone through centuries of criticism. You've had all of these philosophers like Friedrich Nietzsche and Voltaire and postmodern philosophers like Christopher Hitchens and Dawkins, and all of these post-Enlightenment and Industrial Revolution thinkers, they reformed Christianity. And today I can say that Jesus is an idiot, and my life would not be under threat, right? But if I say that Prophet Muhammad is an idiot, or if I burn the Quran, or if I criticize Islamic theology, my life would be under threat. And this is because the Islamic world has not gone through the same patterns of reform and enlightenment. And then what happened after the United Nations laid the groundwork for the United Nations Human Rights Convention, what happened is that the Muslim countries, Cairo, Saudi Arabia, Iran, they were not happy with this, even though they were a part of the United Nations and they are a part of the UN. And they had the declaration in Cairo that said, fine, we see your point of view, we see that you have human rights, but we have Sharia and we have our own human rights that we adhere to. And pretty much everybody in our countries, in Iran, in Yemen, in Saudi Arabia, in Egypt, has to succumb to this. And our leaders, the Iranian leaders, the Saudi leaders, the Yemeni leaders, supported by the Western so-called democracies, supported this. And they said, fine, you as Muslims, we respect your quote-unquote cultures, even though big parts of these cultures, like the Iranian culture, the Saudi Arabian culture, that has really intertwined itself within the law, says that, if you leave the religion, you get killed. If you are homosexual, you get killed. If you have sex outside of marriage, then you have to be flogged. And other countries really maneuvered around this and said, okay, for example, the differences between the Yemeni constitution and the Somali constitution in this aspect is that Yemen says that we don't burn gays, we shoot them. And Somalia say, no, we follow the Sahih and Bukhari, so we throw them from the roof. So these are the differences between the law framework in different Islamic countries. And what the Cairo Declaration was, and I suppose that the reason that the Cairo Declaration was able to be established was because Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Qatar, all of these countries, they are just as rich, if not richer, than Sweden and Norway and all of these established Western countries. And through the power of oil, they were able to establish a sub-United Nations culture that the entire Western world has to follow and adhere to. And we who are seculars, who are ex-Muslims, who do not adhere to this, we're just thrown in the dust. So I can completely understand the nature of being completely against the general elections, because they really do not represent the people who do not belong, right? So like I, as a minority in Yemen, I don't believe in the Sharia. I don't believe in Islam. I don't believe in of any of that crap. And there is no law in Yemen that makes sure that I could exist in Yemen and, practice my lack of belief. And that is the same thing in Iran, but in Iran, it's actually a bigger tragedy, because the number of secular Iranians who do not want to live under this Islamic dictatorship is far greater than the number of seculars who are, for example, in Yemen and Saudi Arabia. In Yemen and Saudi Arabia, it could vary, like, if I'm just guessing, I would say it's like 5%, maybe 8% of seculars. In Iran, it is a much, much higher percentage of Iranians who do not adhere to the Islamic fascistic point of view, and they're all being thrown under the bus. And I would say that the biggest accomplices is Saudi Arabia, Iran, the dictators who stand at the forefront of these dictatorships. And I think I would say that the best way to combat this is to organize ourselves. And the problem with seculars, the problems with atheists, the problem with free thinkers is that they're not really great organizers. Islamists, they're perfect organizers because they work in groups. They're like a flock. They have an ideology. They have a book. They have a set of laws that they have to follow, whether they're in Iran, whether they're in Saudi, whether they're in Sweden. They have their organizations. They know what they get the fund, what they have to get the fundings for. They know what the framework of Islam is and what defines being a Muslim in these countries. But for us seculars, we have a hard time because we're like cats. We have different ways of thinking. Like everybody in this group and I, because we're secular, we're very free thinkers, we probably disagree with each other about major issues where we cannot really be grouped together as Islamists can be grouped together. And that is one of the main problems that seculars face in the West, secular ex-Muslims face in terms of trying to organize themselves against the Islamic dictatorship in Iran and other countries in the West. I actually tried in inviting, I'm sorry if I'm not going to be able to pronounce her name correctly, Masih al-Nijad, who is a hero for all of us seculars and ex-Muslims and people who just want to really advance our Muslim cultures and just make us secular and democratic and protect the rights of minorities and women. She is a symbolic face for that movement, and I'm beyond happy that she is a part of this movement, and I tried to invite her because she alongside people like her, they're the ones that we can use to organize ourselves, to be able to show that we are unhappy with this establishment, with the Islamic establishment, to show the hypocrisy of the Western world and to show that there are voices that are being shunned, and that the oppression that the women and minorities and ex-Muslims face in our part of the world is not being reflected and is not being voiced, neither in the Middle East, neither in the West. Another issue, the last issue that I want to touch upon this, is that we are also a huge problem that I feel we face as seculars and ex-Muslims is we get thrown under this quote unquote white passing racist narrative. You know, if you're not okay with Islam, if you're against the Islamic culture, if you want to have a secular, free Western culture, you will be accused of catering to the racist narrative, to white supremacy, to you're against your roots, you're against your culture. But you know, in my roots, the Yemeni roots, our roots are actually Jewish.
Sorry,
you know,
Mr. Ahmed, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I apologize because we want to stay on the topic and our time is a bit limited. I really do apologize. So Sarah had some comments about the discussion you've made. So I asked Sarah to make her comments. I'm so sorry.
Thank you, Mamadou, and thank you very much, Mr. Ahmed. I'm so sorry for the interruption. Speaking of secularism in Iran, I'm so happy to hear that you have the correct knowledge and deep knowledge, actually, about Iranian people, that many of them, they don't even believe in Islam. But here is something. The problem with the regime in Iran, I think, is something beyond religion. They are following an ideology which is damaging the entire world. They are a threat to the world. Sometimes I don't believe that they themselves, they don't even believe in Islam or any religion. It's just a face that they make for themselves. And that's why I really would like that people outside of Iran, the foreigners, hear our voice, that this regime is a threat. This regime is dangerous for Middle East, for West, for East, for everybody. This has to be removed. And I really would like anybody here who doesn't speak English, who lives in a democratic country, pass this message to the world, that Iranian people want this regime go out of the country or be removed. Okay.
I have a message actually regarding what you've said. Somebody sent me a direct message, and unfortunately he is not here because he complained about the speed of the internet and the filtering, because he has to use some kind of magic trick or VPN to connect to the internet, and unfortunately they get disconnected. They cannot even be with us. But I felt the need, I felt it's my responsibility to read his message. And I believe after what you said, I had to read this message because it's the same thing as you've said. He said, I'm talking to you about Iran. I do not speak English well. Excuse me, but I want the whole world to hear my voice. We live in a prison called the Islamic Republic. We are oppressed. We are executed. We are shot with guns. Are those not enough to condemn the dictator Khamenei? Thank you.
Thank you, Mamadou. Okay, Mr. Martin, do you have any comments? I think you would like to speak about it.
Actually, Pistachio has been requesting the mic for some time. Can we let him go first? And then I'll answer your questions.
Sure, thank you. Ardeshir, let him or her come up on the stage. And also...
Yeah, please go ahead. You're a speaker now.
Okay, and also I would like to take the opportunity and welcome Ms. Ghazal Sharmat, and I would appreciate it if you also make her a speaker. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. So amongst all of us, we know Iranian regime is oppressing our nation 42 years, on and off. It goes up and down, and Western media tries hard to hide it. The best thing we can do, we have to inform their management system. Like I've looked for New York Times, Washington Post CEOs, and I've retweeted under their tweets. And this is the only way we can get our message out. If we sit there and just talk amongst each other, another 4 years of election would go, as Mr. Walton mentioned it. So we have to work hard to inform world media. European Union, you have to contact them. You see their tweets about Iran or JCPOA, you have to write under it, no to Islamic Republic. This regime is dictatorship. Just like you removed Saddam Hussein or Osama bin Laden, you have to remove Islamic Republic of Khamenei dictatorship. What else I can say? We go back and forth amongst each other over and over. We are saying we are different groups. Yes, in every country there should be different groups. We can't be only one party. If there are one party, it will be boring. So we have to be different parties. We have different needs, different regions, different priorities. So it's okay to be different groups, but there has to be like associations. I want to say. Groups that are chosen amongst us to represent us. And for now, there is Radio Iran International, Radio Farda, the Independent Persian, you name it. I have a list of Persian tweets that are coming out of radios that are Persian. None of them represent us. All of them are lobbyists of Islamic regime, and it's very clear. They twist every single news that comes out of Iran. I've been following them 4 or 5 years. They block me. And constantly I have to come up with a new Twitter account because they are not happy when you tell them your news is like last week, Iran International Arabic translated King Salman's messages wrong. And in their Persian tweet, I came underneath it and tagged it and posted his clip saying this is not what he said. They removed the whole tweet. So this is what I can say. No, and there's no proper media that supports us, and that's the big problem. And we have to chase their management team, like Jeff Bezos of the world and Fred Kemps of the world, the top guys, and let them know that they have lobbyists of Islamic Republic that are part of NIAC system, Crisis Group, Brookings, what's the other one? There's four or five organizations, MENA, all of these people. Even Al Jazeera has representative of NIAC system working for them. And I've been looking up for names. Whoever writes articles, look them up. Look up for where do they work, how are they tied with NIAC, and most of them have connection to NIAC and Democrats. That's our biggest problem right now.
Thank you very much, Pistachio. I also see Mr. Farhad Mutaqi in the audience. I would like to invite him to come up on the stage. But before that, I would like to pass the microphone to Mr. Martin. Mr. Martin, do you hear us?
Yes. I agree with 100% of what Pistachio said. She's correct. There is large-scale misrepresentation, which brings to mind last week's meeting when many of the guests described the abuse towards them when they complain against the lobby or the media, that they're called warmongers. I don't know how many actual Iranian citizens that are living in Iran right now are in this meeting, but I want to ask you a hard question. If we're going to be called warmongers, why hasn't war happened? And for the Iranian citizens here, I want to ask, what are your thoughts on the United States or Great Britain arming dissidents in Iran, including, and there's many groups, but I'll name two, and these are not separatists. These are Iranian citizens. I want to make that clear. These people are not separatists. They want human rights. But let's say arming the Awazis and arming the Kurds to start to fight against the IRGC. I would like your thoughts on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Martin. I want to make a note. We usually hold our space 60 minutes. We discuss the main topics, and after that, we have a 30-minute Q&A window. But since some of our guests are a bit late, and I feel the discussion is getting up and running. So I guess we postpone the Q&A session a bit and let others speak. I saw Mr. Jeppe, I guess, from Sweden. He was in the audience. Ardeshir, I appreciate it because I guess due to space bugs, he couldn't speak and he had to leave and come back. If you can make him a speaker, I would like him to make his comments. If not, I would like to pass the microphone to Mr. Adrian Azadi.
Yes, I've sent you the invitation. You can accept it.
Thank you. So maybe he has some difficulties joining me in because sometimes I have this difficulty. I want to become a speaker and it won't allow me. Maybe you could restart your phone because it works for me sometimes. Then you could join again. But in the meanwhile, I would like to give the microphone to Mr. Adrian Azad.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm not sure if my mic works, to be honest. I've heard some different reports today, but I'm actually very curious because when I study, I live in Sweden, just as Luai does, and when I study the Swedish conversation and debate about Iran and about the idea of a military intervention similar to that of Saddam Hussein or what happened to Saddam Hussein, I'm very, very fascinated by Pistachio's plea or argument or will for some intervention, some kind of action from the from Western powers. I'm not sure if she referred to the United States specifically, but she did say that she wants the same thing. She wants the Iranian regime to sort of get the same treatment as Saddam Hussein got. And I would actually very much agree with that, but it's just very, very. I'm almost shocked because when I speak to people, there is no sort of less popular idea than invading a country like Iran. People, to the contrary, they say, a lot of people want the regime. We may live this way here. They don't really, maybe they don't actually want democracy there. They want, theocracy. There's widespread support. And, people will say, intervening is sort of the last thing we need to do. I mean, that's oppression. That's Western oppression, right? So it's just fascinating to hear you, that I very much agree with, because I there needs to be people are suffering right now, obviously, and there needs to be some kind of change. And I'm really sick of sort of light treatment, sanctions and other symbolic actions that are being taken to fight this theocratic fascist regime. So I'd like to ask Pistachio, how do you feel about what I just relayed? How do you feel about the idea that, here in Sweden, I mean, I think I can speak probably for most, at least most young people in Europe, the idea of intervening militarily, at least, is probably the least popular idea. Nobody supports that, and yet you seem to actually do that. So I'm just, were you referring to a sort of a military intervention, a sort of let's kill these fuckers pretty much, who are oppressing the peoples of Iran, or were you referring to more of a sort of arming of rebel groups, arming arming the opposition? What would you like to see specifically from Western governments? Because right now, I mean, they're on their knees. I mean, they're pandering. They show up in Iran with their hijabs on. It's all out cultural relativism.
Can I respond?
Yes, please.
First of all, neither you or me want to have any family members be dead through gun and war. We have had enough wars. Let's try peace at some point. Let's see if it works. Let's see if that fixes something. Then go back to work if we don't like peace. The problem is Western media, Western leaders pretend human rights. At the same time, they don't allow Iranians speak up in the media. So what news that you heard that Iranians' culture is hijab? No, I was born in a village that we didn't wear hijab. We went to school, we were beaten up to wear hijabs. So everything is forced onto us. It's not our culture. It's something that's forced onto us by Hitler, Khamenei's agenda, Shiite sect. And from their deeds, Iranians who were Muslims, now they are ex-Muslims because of the treatment they are getting last 42 years. No, I don't want war. I want Swedish PM, I've been tweeting him this week, to get out of the JCPA, to get out of, to tell UN, CSW, Women's Rights, why they chose hostage taker, Masume Nilufar Mary Eftekar, which she has 10 names because they live in disguise. Why is she representing Iranian woman when she's a criminal? When she's oops, my screen shut.
I just want to be clear. I very much agree with you on the hijab. It's completely clear to me that that's not, Persian culture, that it's a forced thing. So I'm totally on board there. I'm just curious about what the specific action should be. And it sounds like you want the governments to pull out of different organizations.
I want you to request from your leaders, prime ministers, media, to tell the right news that Iranians are obsessed. The Iranian nations do not want mullahs to be in power. We do not want any Islam, any religious power to take control of our lives. Those religion people belong to mosques. They have to go back to mosque. They do not know how to run the country. You see, they have destroyed Iran, Iraq, Lebanon, Yemen, and it continues. All their lobbyists are all over US. They're trying to separate Democrats from Republicans and cause trouble everywhere. They were trying to get with the First Nations of Canada, cause trouble with Canadian government, and that's why the Canadian government immediately closed the Iranian embassy. They noticed they are trying to cause problems. So they put their steps in. They are nothing but trouble. But I don't know. There's money involved. We were born sadly in a land that has oil, and we are not considered as human. And European countries are lying that they are caring for human rights because they haven't been caring for Iranians the last 42 years.
Thank you very much, Pistachio and Adrian. Actually,
can I just say something really quickly? I've been screaming that from the rooftops. What you just said about the true nature of the Iranian people and their plight and the oppression that's going on. I mean, so many examples now. And Luai, I know as well, has been screaming this from the rooftops. And the sad truth is people call us Islamophobic and actually racist as well, which is absurd.
Who are the people who are calling you? Those are the people who are lobbyists of Islamic regime of Iran. Those are the people who practice gay and lesbianism in US and Canada, but they act as, when you meet Jawad Zarif, you have to wear hijab. They are not wearing it themselves. So it's just up to you. You have to open your eyes. What sources you are getting news. Any news person is tied to Zarif. They are lobbyists of regime. They want the regimes to last there. Iranian TV stations want the regime to last. Otherwise, if the regime changes, their station will be shut down. Their $100,000 income will disappear. They just want this chaos to continue, so they have source of income. It's very clear to us, 80 million Iranians. None of us want this chaos ongoing.
Thank you, Pistachio. Thank you, Mr. Adrian. I was going to say, actually, you made a great discussion by making great points. Sorry for interrupting, because I want to stay loyal to the title, and I also have to consider the time. Actually, your discussion came to a good point related to the topic of, do you believe, I'm going to ask Mr. Adrian and do you believe boycotting the election from Iran makes any difference?
No, I think it's not something that I would recommend against necessarily, because if you don't agree with the premises of a supposedly democratic election, right? If you live in a banana republic, a fake, democracy, if you will, then obviously, civil unrest, what is the word? Not participating makes sense. I just don't think that's going to change anything, as you said. In reality, I think it's another sort of, maybe important but not very consequential symbolic action.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I don't believe Iranians should vote. They've been lied to all past elections, so it's best not to vote. But I want to know if Western media will be notified to publish this information from now till June 18 that there is election and Iranians are boycotting the election. There's so far no news. And if you live in any country that has freedom of expression, freedom of rights, why are not media covering this?
I answer? Can I have a word?
Yeah.
I think boycotting the general election it would be a bad move if there is no organized propagation to announce it. There should be a kind of a movement that says, this is why we are boycotting the general election. Because if you throw your vote and if you don't vote at all, then you're not going to make any noise. But
I will give you one answer. Jawad Zarif goes to United Nations and all the UN meeting and says, see, last election we had 70% people show up for the election. These people want us to be here. Iran wants us to be here.
I guess he has another point. He says we should a campaign or something to speak about it. Mr. Ahmed, we actually do have. If you look at avatar of Mr. Martin, it's a campaign running for a few months now. It is called No to Islamic Republic. That's a literal translation. Everybody uses this hashtag to announce to the world that the Islamic Republic are not our legitimate government. It does not have any legitimacy. It does not have any popularity among the people. So that's the campaign we have. But the question I was asking, the original question was if any of the speakers would like, you could answer. The media in the West support the regime. They distort as most of these media are in control of leftists. Most of they are not going to cover the truth. And the Islamic regime to, for example, announce any number they want. They could using they could manipulate videos or photos. Show millions. As they did with Qasem Soleimani. For example, we know his funeral, there were around 90,000 people, but they claimed like 6 million people, in his funeral, which is not true, of course. And, the Western media covered that, but we countered that using 2 Twitter storms. One of them was thanks for Soleimani. It was a hashtag like 40,000 people participated. that hashtag. Most of them were Iranians and Americans. The other one was Iranians detest Soleimani, and we kind of counter the counter. But my question is going back to the original question. Is regime is going to use propaganda tools? The foreign media is going to, like an echo chamber, they are going to echo whatever regime. Do you believe in such a situation, boycotting election makes any difference? It was my question, and I did not receive any exact answer for that. Thank you.
Well, look, I'm saying do it, do what feels right. If you feel, and especially if you have a sort of umbrella term, if you have an organization around it, as Luai said, because the problem is if you just, boycott the election and there's a very small percentage of the population that actually votes, Western media can do with that what they will. I mean, they can blame sanctions, they can make that about anything that they want, but if there is a clear message, we are boycotting the Islamic Republic specifically, that's more difficult to manipulate, right? So do it all the way. But I'm not expecting that. I have to be realistic. I'm not expecting that to be a solution to our problems.
And can I just add to that I think
sure.
In the modern age that we're living in social media, I think one of the strongest mechanisms that could be used in this organization of boycotting the general election is visuals, videos. If you could organize, or if the movement could organize hundreds or thousands of Iranians that, just record themselves with a video, with their cameras, just saying, I'm not voting because, etc., etc., it would really enunciate the movement, and it will give a face to it, and it would really make it more than just text on Twitter and Instagram. So I think making the movement visual would really add a lot to it, because people watch things, they don't read as much.
Yeah, thank you. That was a great
But you are
point.
aware
Yeah.
if you do that, we get arrested and jailed?
Could people have done this, like they don't show their faces, I don't know. For example, they are inside Iran. They record their TV, but they speak over the video. For example, a lot of people send to Iran International or other, Iranian channels. Sometimes I've seen these videos. People send videos. I think it's possible.
Yes, it's a good idea. Also, Iranians have been past month or so writing No to Islamic Republic in Farsi, Na be Jumhuri Islami. That is the one way that we are saying we are not voting.
Yeah, of course. A lot of people, use this hashtag for the past few months. And if you look at the hashtag, you see every day thousands of, tweets with that hashtag. People have been doing it, and it's not just a hashtag. Actually, people, started to get together. They are thinking of ways to, eliminate the regime's propaganda. But as we gather, we discuss, and new ideas like what just Mr. Ahmed says comes up, and I guess that's the point of these spaces. In the end, I would like to thank you all for participating.
Can I add something to it? Sorry, can I add something
Sure.
to it?
Go ahead. Yeah.
I think there is a really big problem here, because every time that people try to, record some videos, or they join some, Twitter storms to say something, they have to use aliases. They cannot do it with their own names. So after that, it always had been some interviews from the foreign minister or other people that they are not real people. They are getting paid from Saudi Arabia, or there are some bots. They are not people. There are some software or something like that. And if they try to use their own name, then as Pistatus said, they would be arrested, even if they record some videos without showing their faces.
also, it's not something that you can prove the media that they are the real people, because they say, okay, maybe there are just some 5 or 6 persons, they are changing their clothes and they are recording something. But we had so many footages also from inside Iran, the people who had put away their fears and they tried to speak up, they showed their faces, but there is nothing on the media. I had seen maybe more than 1,000 of videos of them, but I don't know why nobody wants to speak about it. No one wants to broadcast them. This No to Islamic Republic is a great campaign, and there was not such a campaign before, because now all the people, all the artists, some of the celebrities who had fled the country, and some of sports and normal people, workers, teachers, all of them has been participated in this campaign. But why nobody is talking about that?
The one thing is, sorry, I interrupt. We Iranians have to go underneath the EU, European Union commissions, all the members, people who are gathering for JCPOA, like Helga and so on from Albania, to write underneath their tweets that
Am I the only one not hearing anything?
Because can anybody hear me? Because at the same time that I was speaking,
yes,
I was. Can you hear me?
Yes, we have your voice.
In the middle of my talk, I got a message. I got reported. So this is what we are suffering from. 42 years we've been reported, silenced, oppressed, and we need voices. The media in the West, each and every single newspaper, Sky News, New York Times, Washington Post, you name it. I found one Persian girl works she's connected to NAYAK or in the lobbyist of Iran. And so therefore we have to be our own voices. We have to head to our own city or country, member of parliament, member of newspaper CEOs. We have to write to them directly on Twitter, because they all use Twitter as their way of giving us news on what's their day is and what's going on. So this is it. We can't trust the newspapers. They're not hiring us. They are not giving us opportunity to do so. Therefore, we have to fight for it individually. And if only me, I am writing under their tweets, it's not affecting. I need more of you Persians, more of you who have Persians as friends, who know we are suffering. Do so. So support us. We need our voices out from now till June 18th that there is election. We don't want another November and 1,500 dead in protest and internet shutdown.
Thank you, Mrs. Pistachio. I would like to pass the microphone to Mr. Mossadegh and Tilvar. I would like them to get involved more.
Oh, thank you. Tilvar here. I love the conversation, and I basically agree with everything that you just said. And my thoughts.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. Your voice is very low. If you could speak a bit louder,
okay,
so we can hear you.
Can you hear me better now?
Yeah, it's better now. Thank you.
Okay, now, what I said was I heard a lot of great voices, and you speak my thoughts. What I like to hear is an opposing opinion, if there is one in the group.
You mean in support of
you?
Because it's pretty quiet, because I love everything you say, but in a discussion and a debate, it should also be an opposing opinion, because I guess we all agree on all these things, but it gets really exciting when somebody doesn't agree.
What you say is right, but you can't find it here. Exactly. There are a lot of these people.
Obviously, I'm in the wrong group.
No, that's the problem. They are not the kind of conversation, guys.
Yeah, and if you are the opposing voice, we would like to hear your point. It's a democracy. We could actually hear your point, and our guests could answer that. Yeah. So you have any points?
No, I don't. I was asking if there's somebody in the group who has an opposing opinion.
Thank you. If it's possible, I like to speak and.
Mr. Mossadegh, go ahead. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. I would like to thank Mr. Martin and Mr. Ahmed and other guests tonight, and thank you for listening to me. I believe the boycott of Iranian election is not a question. I believe that even the main statistics of the regime's propaganda showing that about 80%, over 80% of Iranian people won't join the election and would boycott it. But I believe the issue is there is no international media present in Iran. And
I'm sorry, Mr. Moussavi, we cannot hear your voice. Are you able to hear us? Mr. Moussavi, do you hear us? Does anyone else hear Mr. Moussavi?
I think he encountered a bug. I guess he'll join us again.
Yeah, and also I guess Mr. Moutaqi. Anyway, until they are coming back, we are going to give them the microphone to, finish what they have started. But I was about to thank you all for participating in this session. I guess now we can move into the Q&A part of the session. If anyone has any questions from our guests, they could raise their hands, become speakers, and also if you are not, your English is not good, you could ask your question in Ardeshir's profile. He made a tweet about this space. Under that tweet, you could mention him. Your question. We are going to translate it and we are going to ask our guests, or if your English is good but you don't want to come up on the stage or speak for whatever reason.
ما صدای آزادی با هم برای آبادی ایران می جنگیم کنار هم می خوانیم نابود باد استبداد نابود باد استبداد با هم برای کنار هم میخوانیم نابود باد استبداد نابود باد استبداد نه به جمهوری اسلامی نه.
You could also ask it there and we are going to ask your question. I'm sorry, everyone. We encountered a bug. We unfortunately had to recreate the session. I'm going to again invite our guests. So please forgive the inconveniences. And we are going to get back to you in a minute.
Sorry for interruption, everyone. That's the difficulty of this application. It's very new. Meanwhile, I would like to take advantage and pass the microphone to Mr. Mansouri. Mr. Mansouri has a message from Dr. Parchizadeh that he would like to read for us. The mic is yours, Mr. Mansouri.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Thank you, everybody, the guests, for giving us very good information and updating us with the title. Dr. Reza Parchizadeh from the United States is one of my friends, my good friends. Unfortunately, he couldn't access the space. To introduce Mr. Parchizadeh to you, Mr. Parchizadeh is a political theorist and analyst, editor board of journal from Middle Eastern Studies Committee, correspondent of the world's Shakespeare bibliography. So here is the text I read to you. The Islamic Republic is consciously abusing the democratic process to reproduce tyranny with a democratic appearance. From the very beginning, the leaders of the Islamic Revolution institutes the function of elections within the Islamic Republic through a type of government referendum. A demonstration of public support to consideration of the interests of a particular class. Accordingly, unlike the free world, elections in the Islamic Republic are not intended to rotate power, but to consolidate the power of the ruling class. This role can be manifested in the form of Muhammad Khatami, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, Hassan Rouhani, or one of the commanders of the IRGC, who apparently have different personalities. Whatever comes of the regime's ballot box, however, it man's task is to advance the interests of those in power, which almost always conflict with the interests of the people outside power. This was the short message of Dr. Parchizadeh. Thank you very much for giving me the mic.
Thank you. And I also see Mr. Kaveh Moussavi in the audience. I welcome him. Thank you for joining us. And I would like to ask Ardeshir to make Mr. Kaveh Moussavi a speaker.
Yes, I've invited him. Mr. Kaveh Moussavi, please accept the invitation. Thank you.
So welcome, Mr. Moussavi. I would like to ask you to join our discussion.
Sure, I'd be pleased to do so. Yeah, I won't be able to stay long, and I'm sorry if I come in rather late, but I did say that I'll probably not be able to attend, but I'm very happy to be here.
Thank you, Mr. Moussavi. Actually, just before you arrived, there were plenty of people inside our space, but unfortunately, due to some bugs that we usually encounter inside the space, it got, the bug brought down the whole space, so we had to recreate the space. Our discussion in this space is about boycotting the general election in Iran, and also also about the regime's propaganda, the tools they are exploit to manipulate, to control the news, to create a false narrative of reality, to distort what happens in Iran. And unfortunately, the Western media also cooperate with them. We actually had a lengthy discussion. So it's time for the Q&A. I would like to ask our audience if you have any questions from our guests. You could raise your hands, and our host Ardeshir is going to make you a speaker. You could ask the question. And also, if there's anyone who is not able to speak English, you could go to Ardeshir's profile. There's a tweet there with the link to our space. You could ask your question, it doesn't matter, in Persian or in English. We are going to ask our guests those questions. Are there anyone who wants to ask a question? If so, please raise your hands.
Mehdi, you're a speaker now. You can ask your question if you have one.
Hi, everyone. I've got a question from you guys. I just want to know that about your opinion, if you don't mind. To be honest, I have many friends in TV media based in UK. It seems as they don't even know who they are being supported by or where the funding is coming from. I just want to know that, do you think the media based in UK, they play a big role in helping the Republic of Iran, or what their motive, and they are really with the people of Iran, or if otherwise, how can we know for certain the journalists are not corrupt organization working alongside with the Iranian regime? Thank you. And if you don't mind, do you want to add something, my love?
Yes, please.
Okay, sorry.
Hello, everyone. It's Sona. Just a quick thing. With Mr. Walton K. Martin, my response to your question would be that as long as the Iranian people themselves, as you said, want to implement the new rules of freedom of rights, humanitarian needs, or even change to their system, they need to notify England and America to help the Iranian people by bringing in extra force to helping them gain justice for their future. As long as the Americans and England don't invade our country in order to have any sort of financial gain, the Iranian people will agree for them to come and help them when it's needed or wanted at the right time. So this is up to the Iranian people, and the only way to get there is to make sure of what the Iranian people really want and need. And from what I can see, it's not the regime or the ideology. Simple.
Thank you very much, Sona. I guess Sarah had a question she wanted to ask from Mr. Moussavi. Sarah, you could go ahead.
I would like to welcome Mr. Moussavi to our session. I have a question for you. What do you think if the regime loses legitimacy in the upcoming presidential election? What would be the legal consequences?
Well, this can be answered at several levels. I think there's no question that the regime, by now, 43 years after the collapse of the old order, has no domestic legitimacy. I think the internal reports, the external behavior, the responses to the dissemination of factual, evidential, and documented events inside Iran, they all speak to demonstrating a regime that is uncertain of its future, it's insecure, it's certainly lacking confidence. These are not the attributes of a regime that is believes that it is legitimate. So I don't think it's a question of losing legitimacy. It's already lost its legitimacy. A regime that murders something like 2,300 people in 4 days in Black November has no legitimacy. We know that in 2009, we know that there was an electoral coup d'etat, effectively. A regime that, when the first reformist was elected, Khatami, with 22 million votes, 8 years after the event, what does he say? He says, I was just a simple caretaker and no more. Such a regime has no legitimacy. Now, your question regarding international law, and I assume that's what you mean, in international law, the doctrine of non-interference in the internal affairs of states, I'm afraid, continues to rule the roost, with possibly the sole exception of human rights violations. And elections have not quite reached the threshold where you can say holding a non-democratic election is necessarily has reached the stage of saying that this is a violation of international human rights law. International human rights law, insofar as it's now been articulated in international criminal law, covers issues like torture, extrajudicial killing, and such things. I mean, it doesn't cover quite, it may well be that in 10, 20 years' time we'll reach there, but the fact that governments are not elected by fair and democratic means, if that was supposed to be the criteria for triggering international intervention, well, overwhelming majority of the countries of the world would not be safe today, and there would be a call for international intervention. China, with 1.4 billion people, does not hold democratic elections, and yet one can't say its state system is illegitimate. Russia certainly is failing by that standard, and yet, well, the international community is only just beginning to wake up to the fact that Putin no longer enjoys domestic support and legitimacy. I doubt very much if many of the countries in Africa, even to this day, pass muster the test of democratic elections. Certainly in the Middle East, not a single country, with the exception of Israel, and possibly Turkey, possibly just pass the test of democratic accountability. The Interparliamentary Union has set out criteria for defining a fair and open election. By those standards, clearly the Iranian elections do not reach the level of acceptability. But these are standards that are, the bar is still based on Western models of democratic participation and legitimacy. Much of the world hasn't reached there yet. And I doubt very much if the Iranian regime is capable of ever reaching there. It's the contradictory nature of the regime and its constitution is such that while legitimacy appears to come from a popular vote, but in fact, the system of the government of the jurisconsult, the Velayat Faqih, vests legitimacy in God, whose representative is the supreme leader. So I don't think we're going to be able to persuade the regime that just because it doesn't enjoy popular support, as manifested through a free and fair and democratic election, it has no legitimacy, because it claims that its legitimacy comes from elsewhere. Even if it fails manifestly, as I think it will this time, I've seen some of the internal documents of the regime produced by the analysts and the think tanks inside the Ministry of Intelligence, which suggests that there'll be a massive boycott of up to about 72% of the vote. Now, 72%, that doesn't leave a great many serious voters, and many of those voters would have been induced by means fair or foul to turn up and cast a ballot. I doubt very much if that will be enough to say the regime is illegitimate to the extent of requiring international intervention. Look, Belarus, you've just seen in Belarus what happened. There's no question that that election was not fair and open, and it certainly didn't come up to the standards of legitimacy that are required by the standards of the Interparliamentary Union. The Venezuelan elections recently, you've seen what they were like. Even the Russian elections, so the last election of Mr. Putin, and certainly the next one, I think it's they're going to fail by a massive, by a mile, I imagine, the standards. I do not think there will be any more consequences for the regime other than for its own internal cohesion and its own internal unity. I don't think there'll be any international repercussions simply because it is seen that the overwhelming majority of the population have boycotted the elections. There will no doubt be boycotts. There'll be no doubt evidence of boycotts. Most people have phones that have got cameras and they can record the fraud on and fraud. I think, in fact, I'm pretty certain is going to be on a massive scale. But I wouldn't bet on a dramatic change in the international approach to the Iranian regime just because it has failed to demonstrate that it enjoys popular support in Iran. I think the calculus is a very different one when it comes to Iran. That's about all I can say at the moment.
So, Mr. Moussavi, what other factors must be involved apart from the boycotting the general election in Iran to make democratic countries to understand the message first and to take the right action? What factors we have to bring?
Look, the doctrine of humanitarian intervention is a radical innovation in international law and in international relations. The principle, the Westphalia principle of non-intervention in domestic affairs of countries, I'm afraid, and I really mean I'm afraid, to my profound chagrin and sorrow, still rules the roost. It is the doctrine that still, unless the threshold of serious violations of human rights take place. Look, 1994 isn't that far away. May, June of 1994 in Rwanda, something like 900,000 people were murdered with machetes in a matter of 8.5, 9 weeks. And there was no international intervention. Don't forget that. In Darfur, something like 2.5 million people were killed. There was hint of international intervention in that the UN Security Council moved, and the Russians and the Chinese and the US did not veto a reference to the International Criminal Court and the issuance of the indictment against Omar Bashir. And of course, that contributed greatly to the collapse of his regime. In Kosovo, in 1999, you recall, the Russians vetoed, and there was no hope of getting international intervention. So NATO intervened without a UN resolution. The examples of Sudan, Rwanda, Yugoslavia. And Yugoslavia, we had the example, and the International Criminal Court has the International Criminal Tribunal for former Yugoslavia has so held and ruled that there was a genocide in Srebrenica, and the policy of Srpska Republika and Milosevic were to exterminate the Muslim population inside Serbia. And you know what happened, obviously, in the summer of 1995. In Srebrenica, something like 8,000 men and boys were murdered by General Mladic and Arkan and the Bosnian militias. Yet there was no international intervention. It took the imminent threat of mass murder on a truly industrial scale in Kosovo by Milosevic for NATO to intervene. Now, clearly, we came pretty close to a major international conflict. Had the Soviet Union been there still, that wouldn't have happened. NATO would not have intervened, and because there would have been a serious fear of a clash between superpowers. That wouldn't have happened. Today, people are seriously talking of genocidal scale of repression in Sichuan of the Uyghur Muslims in China. There is no hint of international intervention. The idea of expecting international intervention, on a humanitarian intervention in Iran, is a non-starter. It won't happen. In 2004, the international community held the conference in Canada, where I participated in that myself, and I well recall that the argument was, can the international community stand by and let another genocide like the Holocaust take place? Well, nothing on that scale has certainly taken place since the Second World War, and it's unlikely that it would take place. But this I can say is the trend is certainly in the direction of removing the ban on international intervention. It is no longer valid international law to say that violation of human rights, domestic human rights, is only an internal matter. You often find that the speakers of the Iranian Foreign Ministry and the Iranian government, and Mr. Zarif was pretty good at this, he would always say, these are domestic internal affairs. The Chinese still repeat that. And China is a big power, and it plays a heavy, heavy role in defining the nature of international relations. China is adamant that domestic affairs are not the business of the international community, which of course that flies in the face of the whole of the conception of the United Nations system, the Atlantic Charter, the idea that a regime that represses its own people, a regime that's a threat to its own people, is a threat to the international community, is now well-established doctrine. But we haven't quite crossed the boundary of saying, at what point does the international community have the right to intervene automatically? We've reached a stage where you can intervene in theory, but you need the UN Security Council resolution to back it. But the Security Council will not give that when there is China and Russian vetoes on that council. So if you're waiting for a threshold to be reached for the international community to intervene in Iran, to liberate the people of Iran, that's not going to happen.
Dear Doctor,
Thank you, Mr.
sorry, Mrs. Sarah, I'm so sorry to interrupt both of you, but I'm going to back to work. But Mr. Moussavi is here. I just have one question and also one note that I wanted to add. Sorry, I'm a doctor right now. I'm at work, so I'm so sorry to everybody. I'm just jumping to over the conversation. But Mr. Moussavi, there is just one thing that maybe we just lose, and we were lost in the situation. Right now, the big problem we have about the case of the boycotting is just, you're talking about the human right. We have a right. But maybe the biggest problem we are facing right now is kind of those propaganda system with the regime has in so many places, like in Nayak, like in Murtazavi, Fasihi, so on and so forth. Can we take a legal action or something that we will be able also to boycott these voices? They are doing the best for this regime. We see that how they are covering everything for them. If something happens, they immediately show up. Fox News, CSNBC, I don't know, MSNBC, BBC. Oh my God, that's just the worst thing I have ever seen in my life. Is there any way to overcome this, or maybe boycott this system, or maybe we take a legal action against such these cases also? Thank you so much.
Legal action, no. Freedom of speech is a sacrosanct pillar of a democratic order. You fight speech with speech. If Nayak lie, you expose their lies. If they're funded by Iran and they try to hide that, you investigate and you put the papers in front of the prosecutors. I did that with the case of Mr. Afrasiabi, and he was arrested by the FBI. I wrote to the prosecutor in Massachusetts, and I said, this man pretends to be an academic. He's actually a mouthpiece of the Iranian regime, and here's the evidence. And he's not registered as an agent, foreign agent. He was arrested, and the prosecutor is taken to court, and he'll probably go to prison. But the Nayak and those other people are a bit smarter, and I have no doubt. In fact, I've checked some of them, and they have registered as foreign agents. Legal action, it's possible if they violate the law. But the BBC, well, freedom of speech is sacrosanct, and I certainly would not advocate trying to take legal action, because you're going to get nowhere. And the court is going to say they're free and you're free to you're free to express your opinion, just as they are free to express theirs. This is not the Islamic Republic. This is Britain. This is United States of America. And if you want a free democracy in Iran, start getting used to the idea that you have to fight speech with speech, as opposed to, now, it may well be that their resources are far greater than ours. But look, you know how much it cost me to set up that banner in New York, right opposite the offices of New York Times? Certainly didn't take hundreds of millions of dollars. It certainly didn't take tens of millions of dollars. It didn't take $1 million. It didn't take $100,000. You know, we've got to be smart. We've got to be smart, and we can be impactful. I think the regime, I beg to differ. The regime has lost the propaganda war in the West. The shooting down of the Ukrainian aircraft was a massive blow. And the fact that they tried to cover it for 3-4 days and they lied about it, and to this day they're not coming clean, they're still not releasing the black box and all the rest of it, The regime is not the flavor of the month or the flavor of the year in the international community. There is, yes, I concede, there is a misapprehension that the myths of the 1960s left, the anti-imperialist and all that kind of stuff that nobody takes seriously these days, that still has some resonance in liberal thinking, and certainly in left-wing thinking. And the fact that Iran stands up, in inverted commas, to the United States is suggestive of a anti-imperialist and therefore popular and therefore liberation movement, the kind of nonsense that we had the right to believe those things in the 1960s and the 1970s. My generation witnessed the crimes of the Vietnam War, and the generation before that had watched the crimes of the Nazis and the Spanish Civil War and all that. So there was a profound sympathy to the left and the effort against imperialism. And of course, censorship was deep, and people had not read Solzhenitsyn's Gulag Archipelago. They certainly were not familiar with what happened in the Great Leap Forward, where possibly the greatest man-made catastrophe in the history of humanity, where 70 million people died of starvation in China. And so in those days, the left had an excuse. Today, they really don't have an excuse because the performance has not been very well, but the residue of that ideology is still there. And because it's there, and Iran is very, very clever, and they're very good at playing that game, saying we are a small country, we've been bullied by the US, and they try to draw a moral equivalence between the Vincennes shooting down the Iranian Airbus back in 1988, and they tried to draw a moral equivalence between that and the Ukrainian aircraft, which was deliberately shot down in circumstances that are still opaque, but certainly under questionable. So I think the reason, the explanation for the confusion in the Western body politique over Iran is not because of the power of propaganda of NIAC and all this. It's because there are built in the variables and the methodologies of understanding of third world liberation movements, as they say. It's still there. It still resonates with, fortunately, the left. The traditional left is not much of a force, but it's still. So you get Jack Straw, who was Britain's Home Secretary, the man who executed the application of Baltasar Garzón, the Spanish magistrate, to arrest General Pinochet in London in 1998. You find him going to Iran and trying to create a dialogue between a regime that's just not interested in dialogue. I sat with him and I explained to him, I said, Jack, Iran murdered more left-wingers in 8.5 weeks in the summer of 1988 than Pinochet did in 15 years of his rule. General Pinochet was accused of having murdered about 3,500 people. These people murdered in the 1988 prison massacre. They murdered something like 4,500 to 5,000 people in a matter of 8.5 weeks. I mean, he didn't know that. I explained that to him. I put the report that Jeff Robertson, myself, and a few other people drew up and put it in front of him, and he read it. And the only explanation I can find for him, not for Lord Lamont. Lamont is a businessman. He was the chairman of Bali International, Baradaran al-Uqbanda. They were making money, and that was it. I don't think that explains Jack Straw or Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez and Bernie Sanders. And these are powerful people who, in the US, in the Democratic Party, and they're genuinely confused. Up to very recently, they were sympathetic to the Chavez revolution in Venezuela, and they genuinely thought this is an expression of popular grievance against Western colonialism and American imperialism. Well, of course, if you look at the history of the 19th century, the behavior of the United States in Latin America, you give considerable sympathy for them. You say, yes, imperialism was a fact. It isn't now. And the explanation for the support for Chavez and all that in a country where 7 million out of a population of 28 million have fled the country, the scale of the humanitarian catastrophe in Venezuela is significantly larger than in Iran. And yet the sympathy among some groups is still there. I think the explanation isn't for the support, residual support, and I would insist it is residual support and no more, is because of the discourse, the linguistic code, the selection of a value system that still believes anyone who stands up to the US is standing up to imperialism, colonialism, all that. I think it's imperative that we have to have the correct diagnosis before we can find the answer and the solution. So, to sum up, we can't prosecute the BBC, we can't prosecute these NIAC people and all this sort of thing, but we can prosecute Hafra CRB because he broke the law, and we are prosecuting him. People write to me and say, why didn't you prosecute Behnoud and Mohajerani and all these people? I said, what am I going to prosecute them for? They say, because they are propagating for the regime. I said, well, it's a free country, free speech. And, you can't do that. Mohajerani, yes, because he was a minister. He was the parliamentary undersecretary to Prime Minister Moussavi, no relation of mine, by the way, when the prison massacres took place. And therefore, under the doctrine of one, collective responsibility, two, the doctrine of command responsibility in international criminal law, he is culpable, and I will eventually indict him. Yes, unfortunately, my resources are rather limited. I've managed to arrest Hamid Nouri. I came within a whisker of arresting Mansouri, as you know. Of course, they managed to murder him in Romania before we got him. and I've managed to get 17 other international arrest warrants. So, the resources I have are rather limited, and I prefer to focus on the current violators and those who carry out these egregious criminal acts against the population. For example, this Farmandar in Shahragot, that lady, when she went on television, she said she issued the orders to open fire. So that's the page 1 of her indictment. The international arrest warrant I've got against her is based on that. So I need to focus on that sort of thing. But in an ideal world, yes, if I had the resources that NIAC has, yes, I would have arrested Mahjourani by now. And not because he supported the murder of Salman Rushdie, that he did that in Iran. He hasn't dared repeat that here. But because he was, and therefore has responsibility, he was as the deputy prime minister in charge of parliamentary and legal affairs, right at the time when they carried out those prison massacres. And fortunately for us, and unfortunately for him, there is no statute of limitations whatsoever on crimes against humanity. So we will see him in court eventually. But unfortunately, he's not the priority, as irritating as it is that he appears on the BBC and defends the indefensible.
Mr. Moussavi, Mr. Martin is here among us, and he had a different opinion from the perspective that you just announced. I would like to invite Mr. Martin to express himself if he would like to comment on Mr. Moussavi's. Mr. Martin?
Hello, Mr. Moussavi had a lengthy discussion there. So which part are you questioning, Sarah?
I've heard that you believe somehow by force, the regime in Iran by force has to be removed. But Mr. Moussavi, because he is a lawyer and he knows this stuff better than at least me, he said that even with boycotting the election, the other democratic countries and other countries in general, they are not going to involve militarily. I would like to hear from you, your point of view.
Well, he's correct on that. And I didn't say the U.S. take military action, although it might come to that. What I said was, what do Iranians think of the US or UK arming groups inside Iran, which would be Iranian citizens fighting the IRGC and the regime, not Americans? And Mr. Moussavi, you could address that if you would.
Yeah, well, there are the right to rebellion and the right to bear arms against a illegitimate regime is well-established right. It's in the US Constitution, it's in the Declaration of Independence, it's in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So there's no question that where it comes to international law, it can be, there are circumstances in which, yes, supporting a civilian population in overthrowing an illegitimate regime is well established. And there are certain regimes that cannot be removed by any other means. There is no question in my mind that the Cambodian Khmer Rouge could have only been removed by the might of the Vietnamese army. There's no question in my mind that Saddam Hussein would have only been removed by the might of the coalition led by the United States. There's no question in my mind that Idi Amin could not have been removed by the domestic resistance, but for the intervention of the Tanzanian armed military, Amin would have continued his massacres, you know. And there are regimes that, given the nature of the state and control and telecommunications and all the machinery of the repression that's available to a modern state, yeah, I mean, there are many countries whose regimes cannot be removed by domestic opposition alone. So the next best thing is resorting to arms. Now, under what circumstances is that legitimate is one issue. Under what circumstances can one think it's the right and proper thing to do because it's practical and it will have it'll have the right effect? I don't think in the case of Iran, I do not think in the case of Iran, arming the opposition. The Mujahideen were pretty well armed in the early 1980s, and they put up a very, very stiff resistance, and you saw what happened. It consolidated the dictatorship. When Iran was invaded by a foreign army, admittedly well and truly provoked by Khomeini, it only contributed to the consolidation of the regime. And I profoundly believe, correct me if I'm wrong, that the regime is gagging for the opportunity to demonstrate that it is foreign powers that are funding and arming the opposition. I do not think this regime needs to be necessarily overthrown by armed intervention. I think the tensions within the state are so deep, they're so massive. I don't know if many people saw my television interview yesterday. I showed about half a dozen documents, which are top secret documents that have landed on my desk without my asking for them, without my paying for them. And when I read them, I'm shocked. And I know when I published that Pfizer document, and I saw the speed with which the regime responded to it and named me by name on the Iranian television and saying this is a forgery and all that, I knew absolutely that we have really shaken the regime down to its foundations. Because there are deep divisions. There were IRGC officers who call me and say, this son of a bitch, he has banned the importation of the Pfizer vaccine and the AstraZeneca on the grounds that they are British and American. And look at this, 360 shots of Pfizer vaccine has been delivered to his own household. Our families, an IRGC officer was telling me his father had died because he hadn't received the vaccine. His wife was dying of COVID, and he's a senior IRGC commander. And I was able to establish his credentials and all the rest of it. So this is not a regime that we need to distribute weapons amongst the population to overthrow. I think the failure to deliver on all counts, on moral, ideological, material, it is so palpably obvious. The entire population can see this is a morally bankrupt regime. The gap between its promise and its performance is so vast that it's visible to everyone. And you look at the state and you think, okay, the machinery of repression, how big is it? I've got the list, names, numbers, serial numbers of the desertions. Those officers and men who abandoned their weapons and they deserted in Black November. Now, I've got the report for the National Security Council, which I should publish in the next 2-3 weeks, which says quite clearly, had the Black November continued for another 4 days, they would have lost control. The regime would have control. It spread to 234 cities. Had it spread to another 20, 30, and that would have been it. That's why the late unlamented Qasem Soleimani at that meeting advocated the issuing of permits for the bringing in of Hashd al-Sha'bi and the repressive forces from Syria and from Iraq, and they massacred the population in the marshes in Marshar, and so this is not a regime that is that's going to be there for long, and we better not provoke it into engaging in another massacre. I think the divisions and the tensions within the regime are so profound that it is going to engineer an election in which it's going to be a choice between the hard and the harder and the hardest of the hard right. It's going to be either Jalili or one of the IRGC officers. There's going to be no room for anyone, well, certainly not for the reformists or anything else. Now, if there isn't a state that is based on the support of 10% of the population, it's not going to be a viable state. I do not advocate the supply of arms to the Iranian opposition because not only do I think it's not necessary, because I think the regime is on the brink, but as important, I worry about the consequences of the overthrow of a regime through armed violence. I think the Iranian people have suffered enough. 43 years is enough. It's time that we ended the bloodletting and this circle of violence. We really got to break that circuit. And if the regime is overthrown by a bloody uprising of the population, I fear there'll be a bloodbath after that. And where is going to be the hope for the rule of law and the establishment of democracy, which Iran has never, in its 2,500 years, ever experienced for one day? I think the social basis for a democratic state are there now. 76% of the population is urban right now. 45% is under the age of 45. 93.4% of the population is educated. Communications, mass communications, telephony, radio, television, and all that is there. All the usual stuff that political scientists look for to say, well, is this country ready in terms of the social basis for a democracy? Yes, I think it is. Let's not lose that chance by engaging in armed violence and then letting the hard men with guns come to power again. Experience of history demonstrates again and again, when hard men with guns win power, it's very difficult to take the guns away from them. And they engage in fake democratic elections. And you don't have to go too far into Africa and its contemporary history. I mean, the Middle East is replete with plenty of examples. So that's a long answer to your short question. I definitely most strenuously insist we do not want to attempt to overthrow the state by violent means. It's going to get very violent because if these people are backwards to the wall and they think there's no escape route, they will fight to the last. The way to do it is to rely on the conventional methods of transitional politics, transitional justice, which was experienced in many, many other countries. The whole of the movement away from dictatorships in Latin America is a very, very good example. The movement from Milosevic to the dictatorship there, which was a brutal, a bloody genocidaire dictatorship, to democracy in Yugoslavia, is a pretty good example. These things, we know enough in 2021 about the modalities of transitional politics to know that there are better ways than the armed struggle, which was advocated by in the 60s and the early 70s by Che Guevara, Carlos Marighella, and all the theoreticians of the guerrilla warfare and uprising. I think the times have passed. I think Iran is politically, the civilian population is politically far, far more mature than that as to require that kind of intervention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moussavi, for your detailed explanation. I've just been notified by our backstage team. There might be some speakers. I'm not able to see them. If there's anyone other than Mr. Mansouri, Sarah, Mr. Martin, and Mr. Moussavi, go ahead, because I'm not able to see them due to a bug in the space, and ask their question. Are there anyone else as a speaker?
We have Mr. Sam Rahnavat. He's a speaker. Do you have anything to ask?
Maybe he's not in the space because neither me nor Sarah is able to see him.
I just want to clarify some of the, I'm not sure if it's Mr. Moussavi or Dr. Moussavi, his statements. Number one, there are a number of defections from the IRGC. I'm talking to these officers myself. The question of arms going into the country, I'm going to tell you so you know, they've been asked for in different areas of Iran. And these are not small groups. They're groups that number in excess of 5,000. Mr. Moussavi is correct in saying that the United States or UK is not willing to give out weapons to these people. The discussion has been made, but it's on the table. I think it's one of the options the U.S. often speaks about, the options on the table. and there are people willing to go in. With the number of defections in the IRGC, and especially the information coming out about the Pfizer vaccine, there's definitely a separation between the forces inside Iran, and they might wind up fighting each other. There was a third thing, and I kind of forget what it was. But those 2 points I'll clarify, and Mr. Moussavi is correct about those.
I don't disagree. I mean, that's, I don't have the figures, but I don't disagree that that is taking place, and that process is. I am worried about the consequences of it, and I hope it doesn't come to a bloody overthrow. Yes, I fear there'll always be elements that'll put up a fight. There'll always be the diggers and the ditchers, and I think the ditchers are much greater. The tendency and the movement is in the direction of ditching and leaving rather than sticking with, especially with the program that the opposition is offering in all its manifestations. There are those who are saying amnesties. I don't believe in amnesties. I think there can be no peace without justice. I think the example of South Africa is a pretty good one. I think Chile and Argentina are pretty good ones. I think we cannot have amnesties being granted by those people who've been responsible for the most fundamental and egregious violation of the rights of the Iranian people over the last 43 years. No, I don't believe in a bit like Pinochet pronouncing absolution upon himself. As you saw, that unraveled very quickly. International criminal law does not recognize domestic amnesties. So I've made that quite clear in all of my television discussions and debates, that when my distinguished friend and colleague, Mr. Sholeh Sadi, who's also a lawyer, he talks about amnesties and general pardons, I keep telling him that this is a demagogic, and it's demagogic because it's not true. It can't work. Amnesties do not hold under international criminal law. That's the first thing. Secondly, it's to play into the hands of the repressive force of the regime. After all, if you're a sniper and you're getting a bonus for shooting kids in the head from half a kilometer away from a rooftop because they're out in the streets demonstrating, and if you know there's going to be an amnesty, what incentive is there for you to stop? But if you know that the process that's been adopted by the Rome Statute and the International Criminal Court, the process of the international criminal law, is that in exchange for full cooperation, full disclosure, you can apply for a reduction and mitigation. There was a case I keep talking about in Yugoslavia where the accused was arrested by NATO forces, brought to trial, and he admitted what he'd done. And the prosecutor wanted 117 years for him. But in exchange, because of the cooperation, because he for the first time disclosed where the graves were, the mass graves were, and the mothers could give a burial with dignity to their children, and he gave the codes away and all the rest of it, the court took that into account. So that's the example I give. In return for full cooperation, full disclosure of the truth, where are the bodies, to put it... This is what I put to Hamid Nouri up in Sweden when we arrested him. I made sure that message gone very clearly to him, that in exchange for full cooperation, a lot of mothers ring me from Iran and say, please, where are the bodies of our kids? I mean, in general, people know that a lot of bodies are in Khavaran, but that's not all. A lot of other bodies elsewhere. And to this day, we don't know the identities of most of the killers in those prisons. Hamid Nouri was exceptional because Hamid Ashdari had seen as the man's identity card had fallen on the floor when he was bent over. He realized that the man who passed as Hamid Abbasi was in fact Hamid Nouri. We still don't know most of these who these killers were. So we want to say to as a process of transitional justice and transitional politics, in exchange for and in return for abandoning the regime today, not tomorrow, today. In exchange for cooperating with the opposition today, not tomorrow, in exchange for giving us information about the order of battle, the chain of command, who calls the shots, who makes the decisions and how they're implemented, you can expect mitigation. So if you've been a torturer in prison, you've continued these things, you will be punished. There's no question about that. But the extent of the punishment is directly, as in ordinary standard criminal law, is linked to the extent of your cooperation. If on day one you admit your guilt, that's a good step. The judge will take into account. And if you fully cooperate, and these desperate mothers, I'll just tell you a very short story of about 1 minute. The day that the news broke that we had arrested Hamid Nouri, the morning after, I get a call from a mother in Iranian Kurdistan. She said to me, Kaveh, I can tell you, if I had died 3 days ago, I would have died a woman with a broken heart. If I die tomorrow, I can tell you, on my corpse, there'd be a big smile because you managed to arrest the killer of my son. So that has value. And the message we want to say to these people is we want to ensure that Iran finally emerges out of the bloodbath of the Islamic dictatorship into a fully fledged democracy. Just because Iran is in the Middle East, it doesn't mean democracy is impossible. We want to make sure that the rule of law begins to take root. We want to make sure that the rule of law means what it means in the West, that the legislator as well as the executive and the implementers of the law are themselves subject to the law. To do that, we need to make sure that certain processes are in place. One of those is to ensure that justice is about justice. It's not about revenge. It's not lex talionis. It's not the archaic doctrine of an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth and a hand for a hand and a leg for a leg and an arm for an arm and a burn for a burn and a life for a life. We must move away from that. That doesn't get much traction. I get most of the cursing that is directed in my direction is whenever I say the first decree of the government, the new government, should be the abolition of death penalty. And they say, no, we need 20 days to massacre these people and then we'll have abolition. Well, you know what I think of that. So yes, I am fully aware that there are requests for weapons, and who can blame them? In Baluchistan, you saw 2 months ago what the IRGC did. They murdered something like 700 people, and they've decimated and desiccated that land of Baluchistan. The water table has collapsed. It's not possible to engage in agriculture. There's no trade. There's no business. The only activity is smuggling, and the IRGC has monopolized that. So, of course, they're going to look for weapons. Of course, they're going to ask for help. And when you ask them what do you need, they say guns. They keep asking me for this, But I just want to think about the next step, which is, well, what happens if you give them guns? Whatever happens, the IRGC has more guns than you do. And our hard and desperate work to persuade, the number of Basijis who abandoned their positions in the uprising in Baluchistan 2 months ago is pretty incredible. Because Basij has the huge disadvantage of being drawn from the local kids, local boys. And local boys see that their own people are getting murdered and they abandon the regime. But if the opposition had started firing on the Basij, they would have felt very insecure. If they're firing on us now, what are they going to do to us tomorrow? So the message that I try to convey to the opposition is, Iran is not on Mars. Iran is on planet Earth. And we should learn from the experience of other countries. We're not the only country that's going through a crisis of a dictatorship. And we're not the only country that has ever emerged from a murderous, corrupt kleptocracy masquerading as a legitimate government. So let's try and see what lessons there are in other transitional politics. The whole of Latin America in the 1960s and 1970s was in a dictatorship. All of it is now a democracy, except Venezuela. So I think we should learn these lessons. So I'd say no to arms, no to weapons, not least because I am very, very confident we can hear the death knell of this regime, and it's on its way out. There's no question in my mind.
Thank you, Dr. Moussavi. I would like to welcome Mr. Afshin Nariman and Dr. Rouzbeh. And I would like to ask them to go ahead and first introduce themselves because some of the audience may not be familiar with them. And after that, I would like to ask them to join our discussion related to the topic of the space. Thank you. First, Mr. Nariman, you go ahead.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity, and I would rather to just listen. I just want to have one comment on Mr. Moussavi's thought. I want to say that Islamic Republic is different from any other dictatorship that you ever see in this planet. Islamic Republic is a religious dictatorship in 21st century, supported by all corporations, all media, all major power. And that's a monster that the world never seen before. That's different. I mean, look at Islamic Republic. Which of the other dictatorship has forced in other countries like Islamic Republic? Which of them killed people like they do? And they have a religious, they just connected their rules to the sky and to the God, and that's make them even more powerful and more they have like more influence. So I think Islamic Republic, I mean, we can't just compare Islamic Republic with Chile or other dictatorship in the world. Islamic Republic is a different animal, and we have to consider that when we want to fight with it. That was all for now, and I will talk later. Thank you.
Hello, good afternoon, and good morning to wherever you are across the world. And it is a pleasure to be among you. And I just heard some of the conversation that Mr. Moussavi had regarding the Islamic Republic. My name is Molly Razbe, and I'm from the United States. I'm an activist on human rights first, and then, of course, women rights and the rights of children. And all of them are interconnected. And I echo your voice, Afshin, regarding the ideological kleptocratic regime that we have in Iran. None like it across the world. And I would rather to listen a bit, and because I have some notes written about the basically all of the actions that desperate attempts that regime is taking at this time to bring the people to the voting booths. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I would speak later.
Thank you very much. Mr. Ali Reza Shams, I see you come up on the stage. If you have any comments, we would like to hear it. Mr. Shams, do you hear us? So I think he's not able to hear us, but I would like to ask Ardeshir if there's anyone in the audience who would like to ask a question. You could bring them on a stage.
Yes, Mr. Amir, now you're the speaker. You can ask your question.
Okay, one last time, I'm going to ask Mr. Shams, do you hear us? Because if not, we have a limited space for our speakers. If not, we have to go back to the listener. Ardeshir, please remove. Go ahead, Mr. Amir. Mr. Amir, do you hear us? If you are able to hear me, please send.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Go ahead.
I can hear you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I totally support Dr. Moussavi's position on boycotting the election, and I would like to raise a couple of significant points. And by boycotting this election in a couple of months, it sends a clear message throughout the civilized world, and particularly in US, Canada, Britain, and France, that this regime has absolutely no legitimacy in the eyes of the Iranian people. And on recent estimates, recent estimates by the regime's pollsters, there is about 30% participation the whole election. And when the Western world realizes that has absolutely no legitimacy, I mean, and they are negotiating with this regime right now in Vienna. I mean, I have lived in U.S. for 40 years. I'm fully aware of all the players who are in the, all the intellectuals, or the foreign policy makers, and you're having a great concern, and among many people who called for a boycotting of the election, I would like to mention one name in particular. And it is Dr. Sholesadi, Dr. Qasim Sholesadi. Dr. Qasim Sholesadi is a Sorbonne educated legal scholar who, like Dr. Moussavi, is capable and has the qualifications to practice in The Hague. And I would like to encourage the presenters of this forum to invite Dr. Qasim Sholesadi is in Tehran, and he's fighting this regime is in Tehran. And I distribute all his programs twice a week, the live program twice a week, and I distribute to all my friends and members. I mean, through 50 or 60 prominent people, and Dr. Moussavi is one of them. I know Dr. Moussavi very well. I have great respect for him. The fact of the matter is, Dr. Sholesadi needs a wider platform to talk about his third way, Manshur Rah Sevom, Rah Najat Iran. Is a comprehensive plan that encompasses all the concerns that we as patriotic Iranians have. I would like to ask Dr. Moussavi personally to participate in a forum with Dr. Sholesadi to discuss all the pros and cons. And in one particular subject I'm very interested in, Dr. Qasim Sholesadi, the program Manshur Rah Sevom, Rah Najat Iran, is a
I'm
very
sorry,
comprehensive program.
Mr. Amir. Do you hear me? I'm
Yes.
sorry. We have to stay focused on the title of the space, and also we have a limited time, and our guests also have a limited time. So could you please
Absolutely.
wrap
Can I
up?
say this
And
very
ask
quickly,
the question.
very quickly.
Yeah.
Very quickly.
Right to the point.
Very
Thank you.
quickly.
Yeah.
It takes me 30 seconds to be. I would like to encourage Dr. Moussavi to reach out to Dr. Sholesadi and have a forum to discuss the Manshur Rah Sevom. I mean, there is no wider platform. Dr. Moussavi is a great scholar, and Dr. Sholesadi is a great scholar. But I don't know, what to believe in. They have got great programs, and I want to invite Dr. Moussavi to debate, for lack of a better term, Dr. Sholesadi, and point his shortcomings. I'm not a legal scholar, I'm an engineer. And I would like to invite Dr. Moussavi to debate Dr. Sholesadi and point out the shortcomings of his program. That is all I want to say. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome. Dr. Moussavi, do you have any comments on the question Mr. Amir asked you?
Well, thank you, Amir. I'm very grateful. I'm very flattered by, I'm not sure if I deserve all the accolades that you, well, you know what I'm saying. Qasim Sholesadi is a very close, dear friend of mine. and we do speak frequently, and I admire his courage, and he's come a long way from the days when he participated in this regime's success early on. He was a member of parliament of this regime, and for that reason, clearly, a lot of people are prefer to keep their distance. Now, I don't agree with that. I think anybody, I mean anybody, who is capable of helping to get rid of this tyranny, this monstrosity, I am more than happy to work with. I draw the line at. Do excuse me, please. I draw the line at people who have a record of having engaged actively in mass murder, and great many of those have turned and have come to the side of the opposition, as a great many of IRGC officers who until Black November were believers in the system, until the arrival of coronavirus were believers in the system, and when I published that Pfizer document, that had a devastating impact on the belief in the Ayatollah Khamenei and all that. I draw the line at a torturer is not welcome in our ranks, although I encourage the torturers to come and make a full disclosure as to where the bodies are, as it were, to summarize a much bigger conundrum relating to the issue of transitional politics. But Dr. Shola Sadi is certainly at the top of the list of people that I'd be more than happy to talk to, and I do too. There was a forum in which I participated in, and the only difference between us was really the strategy of mass mobilization. I do not think this regime is going to be overthrown by mass mobilization. This regime has demonstrated that it is willing to murder 2,500 people in 4 days, and the only constraint upon this regime is its ability to murder. It is, to our friend who said this is sui generis, unique on the planet, in the history of the planet, no such thing has existed, I can only say I beg to differ. In Cambodia, a third of the population was murdered by the Khmer Rouge over the 3-year period. These people have not murdered a third of the population in 43 years. It may well be that if the regime survives, God forbid, if it survives another 5 years, it may be the environmental collapse and the catastrophe that is brought about not just by the climate emergency globally, but the collapse of the water table and the other environmental crises that have been wrought on Iran by this regime's inadequacies, imbecility, sheer greed, and all that. It may well be that it would lead to a genocidal scale of decimation of the Iranian population, but it's not there yet, and it hasn't done it. Let's not exaggerate. There have been many, many regimes that were far worse in their record than the Islamic Republic. I'm not justifying the Islamic Republic. It's a terrible tyranny. The people of Iran deserve better. They certainly hope for better when they foolishly participated in the lunacy of the Iranian Revolution in 1979. But that is not to say that there are not lessons to be learned from the annals of political science. Political science is advanced. It's based on 300 years of detachment from philosophy and political theory from starting from Locke, Hobbes, and all the rest coming to today. It's become political science. Political scientists do have the tools of analysis to be able to engage in the taxonomy of systems and regimes. This is not a sui generis regime. It's a disease that is well known. We know how to get rid of kleptocratic autocracies. We know that this is not a regime that will give up power willingly. It is not. Democracies give up power willingly. Some presidents don't do, but then they're pushed out. Depends on the depths of the institutions, how resilient the institutions are. In Iran, democracy is about a wafer thin and no more. So we can't rely on the institutions to get rid of the regime. It'll put up a fight, there's no doubt about it. The question is, how do we get rid of it? Shola Sadi thinks by mass mobilization and general strike, we're going to bring this regime. No, this is not the regime that would be brought down by general strike. It couldn't care less as long as it can feed the IRGC and its 4.5 million, the Basij, it just keep going. And it demonstrated, for me, despite the fact that I've been in the opposition for 43 years, I was active with Dr. Bakhtiar as a graduate student at that time at Oxford University, and I've been in the opposition since. I can tell you, for me, it was a transformative experience when I watched what happened in Black November. I can't say it was a shock, but I was surprised at the brutality. And I was also surprised by the scale of the uprising. 246 cities, as far as I saw in the national.
Thank
It
you.
was suppressed. Of course,
Thank you.
had it continued for another 3 days, of course, let me finish with this. Had it continued for another 3 days, the regime probably would have been overthrown. So a regime which is back is to the wall like that and is putting up that kind of resistance is not going to be overthrown by a general strike, which Qasem Soleimani is advocating. It will be overthrown by the breakup of the state. And the state is breaking up very, very rapidly. And not only is alienated all the reformists and all those who fought, there are many, many people who fought in the war, disabled people, veterans and all that, who are in the opposition. And now increasingly, IRGC officers, the army itself is, when Rouhani the other day, a month ago, called and said the army has to decide what side it's on. That's a telltale sign. That's a telltale sign that the tensions are so profound and they're so deep within the state. And, typical crisis dictatorships, when the will to power, when the will to rule is dissipated, that's when these regimes collapse. The Portuguese dictatorship, it lost the will to rule. The Spanish dictatorship, when Franco died, the old elite no longer had the will to rule the state the way they murdered some 500,000 people at the end of the Civil War in 1939. But by 1975, they'd lost the will to live. In Iraq, Saddam's dictatorship had not lost the will to live. That's why it took the might of the US and the coalition to overthrow that regime. The Iranian regime is clearly, there is no question in my mind, you can see all the signs that political scientists look for of the internal cohesion of the regime is collapsing. And I think with a minimal price in blood, we can overthrow this. What Qasem Soleimani is calling, and I've told him, he is playing into the hands of the regime. That is the reason I submit to you, to this audience, that's the reason why he's not in jail. That's the reason why he's not arrested. He comes out with pretty outrageous, very courageous things, and you have to correct, begs the question, why is he not banged up in jail? And the reason, wearing my hat as a political scientist, not as a lawyer, I know the answer. Because that's the kind of thing that the regime welcomes, because if there is a mass mobilization, it has the excuse to open fire on the civilian population. 2-3 more times, and the civilians will be so cowed that they'll go back home. And they won't come out under any circumstances. And if they won't, then the regime has won. This is why I profoundly disagree with him on this and on the issue of amnesties, which I elaborated on before. As I would be happy to go on and discuss why I say this regime is not sui generis and that there are lessons to be learned from the experiences of other dictatorships who have been far more brutal, perhaps not as corrupt, and to say that this religious really doesn't add anything to the picture. Ideological regimes ideology is another form of religion. When the Khmer Rouge declared year zero, it means everything that had gone on in the history of the planet up to 1975 was to be dismissed. It was to be rejected. Year zero was just like the French Revolution in 1789. When the revolutionaries the Jacobins came to power in 1791, they declared it year one. That's a religious of the supreme being, which the French revolutionaries had, and the Khmer Rouge had, and the Maoists had. It doesn't help to say just because this is religious, it's this, that, the other. Actually, it is not religious. This is a regime that's a kleptocracy. These people don't believe in any of this religious stuff. They are more than happy to accommodate. Look, when Ayatollah Khomeini, I leave it at this, when Ayatollah Khomeini openly stated that the Islamic government can suspend the laws of Islam. It can suspend the edicts, the fundamental edicts, the Arkan ad-Din, the Hajj, Namaz, Rouzeh. It can suspend all these things. That's a day when any observer looking at the regime will say, no, this is not a religious regime.
this is about power. If power so requires, they're prepared to abandon all of these. Every edict of religion, they're prepared to abandon it. And you can see, the Shias have this thing, taghyeh, and they're prepared to bend the rules to the point of breaking it and justifying it by saying the survival of Islam required it. So those who are continuing to believe that this is a religious regime and base their analysis on that, I'm afraid they're going to miss the target. The conventional means of tools of analysis of political science. Is this an ideological dictatorship? Yes. What else is it? It's not transparent. It's not accountable. It's repressive. It's kleptocratic, which means the economy is never, ever going to be a competitive economy. Therefore, it's never going to deliver the kind of growth that China has delivered, 6, 7, 8, 10%, which wins it legitimacy every year, which means its weaknesses are A, B, C, D. If we miss that, then we will miss the diagnosis. And if we miss the diagnosis, we will not be able to prescribe the correct remedy. I'll leave it at that at this stage.
Thank you very much,
Thank
Dr.
you.
Moussavi, for the great explanation. We actually didn't expect the space to attract this amount of visitors and audience. It was really great, but we, because I know for sure our guests have a limited time, and it was way beyond what we have anticipated. So we are going to wrap up in around 15 minutes. And I would like to pass the microphone to other guests if they would like to speak. Otherwise, we are going to the audience and they could ask any questions from our guests. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Mr. Baba, can I ask my question now? Because I got my notes.
Sure.
I was coming inside the house. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity again. And thank you for this great conversation with Mr. Moussavi. I have heard your name from far, and I have heard a lot of good things about your expertise, actually. So what happened, Mr. Moussavi, my question is, considering all of the attempts, the delegitimizing this regime during the past 3 to 4 years, and considering all of the attempts, including Clubhouse, as you know, all of the speeches that Zarif made, and finally they leaked out, also death of Khamenei each time the voting comes, and all of these events. And as you know, the Islamic regime always has some sort of, fire is burning continuously for the past 42 years. And also considering the need for opposition to get together, put their hands, and basically consider the national interest of the country. And you might have mentioned this one. How can we basically reach out in your experience, which is a long experience, to the Iranian people in the rural area of Iran, to basically encourage them not to vote? Because we have reached out many people by social media, the one which are educated in the cities, etc. However, as you know, the Iranian on the rural area villages, and those who don't have access to these social medias are a bit difficult to reach out and convince that this is not the right system for you. And there are always mullahs over there to, fill out the gap. How do you see that we can reach out to these people? Can you please advise us based on your experience, or based on what you are doing? Because I know this is the time for the big push to further delegitimize this regime and basically push them out of, maybe put a big question mark in the eyes of European countries who are still hoping that this regime is going to change or make some sort of, give some sort of freedom to the Iranian people, which never is going to happen. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you. There were several, there were several questions there, and I would try and take them one by one. the question of Europe and the attitude and the posture of what, for want of a better expression, the West. I'm not sure if the West is a big player in Iran anymore. It doesn't trade very much. It's boycotted some of the main players in Iran, the main sources of power, which is the IRGC. President Trump declared them to be a terrorist organization, so they effectively are out of the picture. It's a myth. It's a big myth that, but myths are powerful, very powerful. And there's a myth called God, and it's been ruling the roost for several thousand years. And and people killed for God, and they engaged in crusades for God, and they engaged in the 30 Years' War in Europe for that, in which the entire continent was laid to waste. And another myth for God, they went and colonized Latin America and all that. So myths are important, but it is a myth to suggest that the West is keeping this regime in power. No, the West is not. They're not buying oil. It's not giving them finance. Very difficult for them to engage in any dialogue beyond the question. Whenever I see foreign ministers or even prime ministers and I discuss Iran, after politely listening for half an hour, they say, show me an alternative. Show me an alternative, and if it's viable, we'll back it. Now, of course, that's a chicken and egg situation, but, it is a very valid point. The opposition for the last 43 years has not been able to organize a kind of resistance that would be able to stand as an alternative to the regime. And it's very important. When you talk to Western governments, they say, show me an alternative. Show me that tomorrow, if we remove recognition for this regime and back you, you're able to, A, take power, and B, ensure that this beautiful country with a history of 2,500 years of recorded history isn't going to fall apart and become a Yugoslavia or many other countries. The answer to that, well, think about it. Are we an alternative? Have we been an alternative? Have we been able to build an alternative? And the Islamic Republic has played on that. They played on that. They say these are a bunch of jokers who are mainly engaged in fighting each other. And so I don't have an immediate answer to that. And I say, yes, we can become an alternative. And in certain circumstances, let's see how other oppositions have built up and taken power. You see, in South Africa, the West definitely supported the apartheid racist proto-fascist regime of the nationalists of Pik Botha and Verwoerd and Vorster and those people. The reason why it did it was because of the Cold War. The Cold War, there was the Soviet Union was on one side and the West and the, at the time, not so free world, the whole of South